many of you have listened to the Head, Heart, and Boots podcast? I can't tell you that reaction, how much that means to us.
Welcome back to the Head, Heart, and Boots podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Brennan. Join us as we wrestle with what it takes to transform ourselves and the businesses we lead. This new camera angle makes my arms look smaller than yours.
I'm noticing that, and I really appreciate it. I thought you did that on purpose.
No, I didn't, and I am not happy with it. Amigo, how you doing?
You haven't hit record yet, bro.
I did hit record. It just didn't tell you, and I don't know why.
Oh, hey, you stole the opener. Hey, how's it going? So this is an interesting episode, right? Because it's snow day here in Oregon.
Literally.
So,
yeah.
So I'm
day is probably what really happened. I've got a bit of a ice hill that it would require chains probably just to even get down the hill right now, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, and I'm recording this from an island, from the island in my kitchen, in Corvallis, Oregon. So
Hence the
yeah,
blurred
funny.
background. Yeah, hence the blurred
Yeah.
background.
So anyways, we don't normally record this way, but hopefully it's 90% there.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
Yeah, so hey, for those of you who are brand new, because we have a lot of new listeners that have been coming to the podcast.
Cranking up recently.
Yeah, I just actually got a message the other day that from somebody that said, "Hey, I shared one of your podcasts with our CEO," and I was like, which one? What did you feel like they needed to hear? And, they came back and it was something about accountability. So I'm not sure what message they were trying to send to their CEO, but anyhow,
up the chain.
yeah. So anyway, if you're that CEO, yeah, what is this all about? Who are we? Right. So for the uninitiated, Floodlight, so this is the founders podcast, Head, Heart, and Boots, for Floodlight Consulting Group, and we are a full service consulting company. We partner with restorers that want to grow and scale their companies and create a ton of enterprise value along the way. Um, that's what we do, and we work with restorers, from zero to, right now, I think our biggest client is on track to probably do 60 million bucks this year. Folks that are venture backed, with PE money, doing roll ups to the mom and pop family based company that's been, working in the family for 10 years. So we kind of cover the gamut, but we're a strategic partner, and it's tailored consulting that helps people get to where they're trying to get with their business. If you want more information on that, you just go to floodlightgrp.com, and we got all kinds of intel there, including some customer testimonials and whatnot.
Dude,
I
know, man.
Where do we want to go, bro? Where do we want to go?
In my head, I've got something in my head, and you know how we do it. Like, it feels like we start wrestling with stuff. It's been kind of the MO, right? That it eventually makes its way to the show. In some shape or form. And man, I've got some emotional, physical responses to some of the things happening around me. And inevitably, when that happens, I begin to kind of go through this thought process. You and I both do this. This is where a lot of our conversations come from, where, like, what is true about this in my world, right?
Yeah.
Where do we see this showing up in our business? Where do we see this showing up in our clients' business? Like, what's the application? I'm having this thing that I'm experiencing, and then
are we talking about DOGE and Hitler and USAID?
Oh,
is this
man.
where we're headed, bro?
Yeah,
Is this a little bit of where what's instigating this?
That's what's fueling, right? I think anybody that's got a social media platform of any kind that they participate in, I think for years, right? But it's just become so explosive. We have all these things pouring in, right? And at first, my initial response to that is I pick my side, I have my perspective, I have, the things that I latch on to. But underneath all of that, there is a part of me that recognizes some root experiences, perspectives, or maybe fuelers that are present right now in our political environment that are very similar to what happens inside our organizations when we determine that change is necessary. right? And of course, what do we do? We're, our firm, we're a consulting firm. And so we inevitably have all these kinds of relationships that we're surrounded by, where as a consulting partner, our consultants are walking side by side with business leaders and their teams through, in most cases, very substantial change,
Yeah.
very substantial change. And it's been hard for me to act as if,
Yeah.
right, that's completely different than ultimately some of these things that we're seeing in the political environment around us right now.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, to your point, and I think the underlying thing that all of us are seeing that's kind of provoked this conversation, I I think like you and I were both, I think we both feel the same way. I've been shocked by the level of emotion
Yeah,
and drama that's been ensuing
yeah,
within our political system and is showing up in the socials. Like for me, I'm primarily a Facebook and LinkedIn guy, and occasionally Instagram. And it's less so with LinkedIn, for obvious reasons, but Facebook and Instagram, it's unbelievable to me how visceral of a reaction. And I think right now it is. It's like it seems to be kind of drawn across party lines, like the way people are talking about it publicly, like
yeah.
the conservatives, yeah, Musk, yeah, Trump, break up the, establishment and this corruption and da 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 da. And then on the far left, it's like fear, anxiety, concern, uh, vitriol towards Hitler. There's like the Hitler association with Musk,
Oh yeah.
and also fear and concern about the complete removal of social safety nets and all these things that they view as having a really important place in kind of our society and the way,
Yeah.
our quality of life in the United States and taking care of the least of these and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just this incredibly polarized
Yeah.
conversation that's happening. And I think the other thing that's been a little bit anxiety producing for me, and there's part of me that wants to comment when I see these things show up in my feed.
Yeah.
And what's kept me from saying anything about it is that it feels like there's a lot of this labeling that's just continuing to happen in our culture. And it was all through COVID and it's like there's this instinct on both sides to label the other as fundamentally this. If you say this or you believe this, it also means this about you.
Yeah.
And the same for the other side. And I feel uh like I actually am, I think most of my friends and including you would acknowledge this too. Like um I have some things that I believe and think that others would think is very conservative. And then I have other things that I think and believe and are part of my life that people be like, what a liberal, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like I think actually more and more most people are that way. It's like, well, tell me the topic and I'll tell you if I'm conservative or liberal.
Yeah.
And yet in the socials and what people say out loud,
Mhm.
it's like incredibly emotional and polarizing.
Yeah.
And because I think there's nothing rational about about this. It's like people have this emotional thing that's that's stirring them up, and um, I don't know, man. It's very anxiety producing. It's so much so that while I'm still looking at social media, I can actually feel myself
Yeah.
getting either angry or anxious
Yeah.
every time I scroll through my
No.
feed right now, you know?
Yeah, and it's true. And I mean, I think, I have a fairly conservative background. I'm ex-military. Like I certainly have experiences and things that drive my perspective, that drive my opinions and those things that I feel strongly about. And but what I've tried to do right now, and I think that this is kind of where my mind started to spin up a little bit about, about a potential show was, I'm like, look, regardless. of where you are in the process, right? Regardless of the side of the table, the side of the aisle, however you want to say it, there's these things that happen under change, right? That draws out these emotional responses and perspectives and behaviors that sometimes are great and really lend themselves to supporting positive action, positive mindset changes, all the things. But then there's these really raw emotions that also rear their head at these times where just it's fear, it's hunkering down, it creates defensiveness, it creates this closing off. And I think it was that those truths, right? Again, right, wrong, or indifferent. This is not a political conversation, but it's just when you watch those things happen live and you experience your own reaction to them, I think it's feasible for us to look at that and say, again, right, wrong, or indifferent. These are
Yeah.
truths that happen under the pressure of big change, right?
Yeah.
Like inevitably, these things are going to happen. And again, some of it's fear, some of it is excitement, some of it is immediate alignment, some of it is immediate defensiveness and closing off. And I think as I continue to kind of process through some of our client relationships, some of the clients that have made just these unbelievably profound movements in their business, there's been a theme that there has always been some friction around, and that is the emotional, mental responses of all the people in the organization to that change that's coming. And again, you got
Yeah.
people that immediately lock and load and get into alignment with the change based on their perspectives, right? And place in the business. And then you have others that it scares them and that fear begins to drive certain behaviors. And so I had three questions come to mind as I was chewing on this. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to kind of dig in to this as part of this show, right? Um, and maybe I could quote this, or not quote this, but table this in the with the intent that when we ask these questions and think about this in our own organization, the ultimate outcome that we're looking for is positive movement and change in the organization. Like I want us to come to some definition or agreement on the definition of the outcome that I would be looking for. And my personal perspective is asking myself, asking teams these questions with the intent that we can create alignment, that we can create positive forward motion and movement for the company and all those participating in the mission in front of us, right?
Yeah.
And the first one is how do we tear down old ways of thinking? Okay. How do we tear that down? Again, though, with in light of or with the ultimate outcome that as part of that tearing down process, we end up in a place where there's this positive change, positive movement, positive opportunity for us as individuals, right? Um,
Sure.
so how do we think about how we tear down old ways of thinking so that we are open to and capable of hearing the change, hearing the motivation behind the change, and contributing in a meaningful way, right? How do we learn that in the face of change, is there a way for us to more consistently create an environment, influence our environment that we can set aside fear in the face of the change? Okay.
Mm.
And then my third one is, and maybe this is kind of the how almost to a certain extent, but how do we create trust within the team during these big changes? Like, and again, I think it's very easy for us to think about parallels with what's happening politically right now, where people are saying there is transparency, people saying there's not enough transparency. Well, either way, you know what that tells me? Transparency is one of the things that we require in order for us to make some of these shifts, right? Big shifts in an organization and not be stuck in old ways of thinking, not be afraid and defensed up because of fears. But
Yeah.
that's where my head has been going with this kind of parallel, right, to the political environment that is absolutely present in everybody's socials right now. But how do we
But
apply it? How do we think about this in our own company? Because we've gone through it, right, Chris? Like
yeah,
even the iterations in our business were in context. They were big enough based on the size and number of people and age of relationships inside our company that they created these things in our team too. We had moments of fear. We had
yeah.
moments of just not being able to get past our old way of thinking, and it created friction and dysfunction, right? And I think we were asking ourselves the question over the last 18 months as we make these big sweeping changes. How can we continue to earn trust and get the team to go with us as we make these changes that are better for the team, you know?
Well, yeah, it reminds me of so many past experiences of change that you and I have participated in together and or led.
Um,
I think going back to kind of our original analogy, this whole political thing that's happening and the new administration and all this kind of stuff. The one thing I would say that I don't think is partisan at all, really, it's just like as a leader looking at other leaders' behavior.
mhm,
I think one of the key flaws of this administration thus far in how they've been going about the change management is that I think you could make a very easy case in saying um, there could have been a more constructive way of leading the parties involved into this change initiative
mhm,
with more of an effort to gain buy-in around the why and the what, right? And to where you could have addressed some of the fear, anxiety, and concern on the front end by simply um, engaging more in the in gaining buy-in before the initiative. And we've seen this so many times in companies, so many leaders, and I've been guilty of this many times,
mhm,
where it's like you see this critically important change that needs to be made. There's no bones about it. Like this change has to happen. And I have just arbitrarily ushered the change in one fell swoop. I did this in my state farm agency. And I can think of a couple examples with my small team of 5, 6 employees, where it was really poorly executed and poorly received because I had no buy-in.
mhm,
The others weren't part of the decision. They weren't convicted about the need for the change the way I was because I didn't give any time, effort, or energy to consider how is this going to land with my people? Do they agree with me on the necessity for change?
mhm,
Are there aspects of the change that I don't even understand that my team may be able to help illuminate for me? Are there consequences to us making this change that I may not even be aware of that are mostly going to fall on my team as opposed to me?
mhm,
It's like there's all these things that in hindsight, I look back over my career when I've screwed this up,
mhm.
and it's been more than what I can fit on my count on my hands. When I think about it, those were the things that I failed to really give consideration and planning to is okay, what do I not know about this problem? And then what do I not completely understand or have I not accounted for when it comes to the impact this change is going to have on my team, both short term and long term? What is the perceived impact to them personally? Maybe in terms of workload, maybe in terms to their own income or their own job security, perceived or otherwise,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, even though I may have no intention in making this change of eliminating roles on my team, as an example, is it possible that other people, it's going to strike fear in them that their job is on the line? You know, like did I even bother to really think through the unintended consequences
Mhm,
of this change that I see as so mission critical? And maybe it is, but it's like if I, looking back on those moments, how much different would the outcome have been if I had met with my team, say one on one, and and told them what I was thinking
mhm,
and communicated the weight of this thing that I perceived and asked them, do you agree? From my perspective, it seems like if we don't make this change, it's going to have a really severe detrimental effect on us in this period of time or in this way. What do you make of that? What's your perception of that problem in our business?
Mm,
Um, do you agree that's a big deal, or do you think potentially I'm blowing this out of proportion, and why?
mm,
Right? Like if I had laid that groundwork, chances are very good, unless I'm a total dum-dum, and I have been that at a couple intervals where I was focused on the wrong thing, or I was making a bigger deal out of something. But
yeah,
it's like most of the time, I think most leaders are pretty intuitive about what's going on in their business. But I think if I had taken that path, I think most of the time my team would have been like, hell yeah, we got to do something about that.
yeah,
And they probably would have had some insight for me of things. Hey, but what about this? Like, does that mean we're going to change our compensation? Does that mean we're not going to get bonuses anymore? Or does that mean, is our salaries going to get reduced? Does this mean that you're going to fire so and so? Like all of that stuff could have been teased out
yeah,
before the decision and everything was rolled out to avoid like probably 90% of the drama, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Yeah, I think just as kind of parallel where you're going with that is, and almost a disclaimer of, we're not saying that when someone or part of the process or the system is bad, like it doesn't fit, it doesn't align with the bigger mission, it's not an appropriate fit inside your organization, that those aren't truths that you need to deal with. Let's just set those aside, right?
Yeah,
For just the sake of clarity, like we have system misfits in our companies. And at the end of the day, there's just employees, let's say team members, that at the end of the day, they don't align with kind of the fundamental things that drive the organization. And that's not good or bad, it just is. And it means that they're not an appropriate fit for our particular team. Yeah, so let's just set that group aside though, because that's not who we're talking about. I think
totally.
this element of we have these chemical responses that at many times we aren't very conscious of. They're just driving our behavior. Like I've
Yeah,
seen so many times changes in businesses where my employees or my team members' employees that we're working with, the fear that they have about the change is absolutely unwarranted. Like there's no real data or facts that
right.
supports their fear. And right, and it could be true that behind the scenes that all the strategic planning and conversations you've had with your coach, your leadership team, your consultant, that it's really clear you're a stand-up man or woman and all of these changes are actually to the benefit of your employee base. And as true as all those things are, it still does not remove the fact that our people will have a moment of fear in response to inevitable change. And I think that what you're highlighting is that it's so important, or we have the opportunity, probably more so than we remember or proactively engage in. We do have plenty of opportunity to identify that elephant in the room for that individual and help them more responsibly, maybe think through that fear, unpack it a little bit with them. But I think unless we ask, we don't even really know what it is about the fear, about the unknown for them that's creating the anxiety, creating the friction, the stress, the lack of their ability to get into alignment and be in a positive response to what we're trying to accomplish. And it's like, to some extent it's not their fault, right? Like
Yeah,
if we just as adults think about in our own worlds the things that create fear for us, right? Like my fear is not fear of the dark. It's not weapons, right? But I have fears. I have fears about, I mean, let's just be raw. Like I have fears around not being respected, about not being understood correctly.
yeah.
You
Being
know,
misunderstood. Yeah,
being
yeah,
misunderstood. I hate that. Like principally, it is a real driver for me.
yeah.
It creates anxiety in me if I think that an audience or a person or someone is misunderstanding where I'm coming from. Right.
Like you
Anyways,
think the wrong thing about you, right?
it's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
wrong thing to
Same.
sign labels and do all the things that they're going to do. Right.
Yep.
Well, I can have unrealistic moments of fear. There's no data that supports it, there's no facts that support it, but I can
Yeah.
be in an exchange or experience something that puts me on my heels because this fear thing chips in. And I think that's what we're talking about. Again, this is not a left side, right side conversation. It's our people are going to be faced with fear when we change our organization. And that fear can often create an unrealistic response, an out of context response, even when what we are proposing or saying or showing from the front of the room, none of that should be creating fear. But
Yeah.
then fear exists in place of it, anyways. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, you and I, we gave a keynote 2 years ago at the Collective by Core. And this was
Sure.
actually, it's funny, the intersection here, because I think it's really applicable, right? We were talking about what's his face's illustration at the Global Leadership Summit, Hybels,
Oh,
Bill
yeah.
Hybels, right?
Yeah.
Was just talking about this dynamic inside all of us, right? Where our present day behaviors, or really our unconscious behaviors and reactions,
Mm.
right, to present day stuff is inextricably tied to these things way down deep from prior past experiences, being misunderstood, being humiliated, having, key failures or traumas or wounding in our past, whether it be our family culture or other negative professional experiences.
Mm.
And it's just like us in the present day moment, pulling that file folder
Yep.
when we hear a key word, right? A keyword references that old file, and it's like, oh, I know what's going on here.
Yep.
And that's exactly what I think. I mean, not only does it happen with us as leaders when we're rolling out change, like sometimes when we see problem, I think this is maybe this is what it is too. Part of it where leaders go wrong is in even assessing problems and identifying, oh, this is a huge deal. We got to so that sometimes that response of this has to change, this is bad, is also coming from that file folder that we're unconsciously pulling. We encounter a situation in the business or make an observation,
Yeah.
and it reminds us of something else that we screwed up or did or was done to us,
Yeah.
and the alarm bells go off.
Yeah.
And without even really processing the current situation further, we're
Mhm.
like, this has to change. And we go into action mode. We tell the team what's going to happen.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the team has their own response where they pull the fall. I remember my last boss, they did this and it meant this for me. And then they start reacting out of that. And then all of a sudden, it's just chaos, which is kind of what we're experiencing in the whole political scheme. But man, you and I felt this. I certainly felt it. Just reminds me of one quick story. Like when I was a State Farm agent, okay, I I read a book. I want to say it was by Dan Pink, and I can't remember what the book, which one of his it was, but it basically talked about the downsides of commission-based sales, like this misalignment in terms of
Oh, yeah, I know what you're
uh,
talking about.
service level to the customer. Like, and so it just presented this concept of, hey, really, you're not getting any better performance out of your people with incentive-based pay. That if people had a salary and were properly paid on the salary side and given proper vision and mission and values and culture and so forth, that it's actually better overall. And I'm totally oversimplifying, and it sounds dumb the way I'm saying it, but I was motivated, and I'm like, I'm gonna take my people all off commission. We're gonna be 100% oriented around what the customer needs and incentivize that. And I completely revamped my comp system for my whole team of 6 employees. And I was super convicted by it, and I rolled it all out to the team. And and no surprise, it really knocked my team off of balance.
Yeah.
I mean, it completely sent us off kilter. And we ultimately salvaged it, but it threw us into a tailspin here
Yeah.
because I had some employees that were like, "Oh my gosh," because I was raising their salary base too to try to. I thought I had thought all the way through it, but inevitably, some of my team was up in arms. Well, what do you mean? That means I won't be able to, and they were worried about now they can't make as much, and it was. And why would you do this? And some assumptions were made about me and why I was doing this and make it was more in it for me somehow and all this stuff. And it was like I was the bad guy.
Yeah. I think that's a
And I
great,
think that
right?
happens all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a great example because it was clear what you heard in that messaging, that training, that book was this is better for your people and it's
Better for
reasonable,
everybody.
right? And you're
Yeah.
like, okay, it's better for my people and it's a reasonable, request. It doesn't compromise the organization or the institution from your perspective. All very positive reasons for you to begin implementing this change. And then we do it, the methodology in which we do it, and it creates this outcome that we're shocked, disappointed, or completely derailed from, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's, even in that, I think that's a great example, actually, Chris. So a couple things. I think I, you know, th hang with me here. Counseling. I don't know how many people listening to our show have ever been to a counselor. I actually haven't personally been to one. I probably should. But I haven't.
Yeah. Or not. All a matter of perspective.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got very dear, close family members that have leveraged counseling to a great degree, and it's been something super positive, right? And so
Sure.
here are some of the things that I loosely understand and about counseling. Well, first, and it's like going back to these questions, unraveling old mindsets, breaking down old mindsets, reducing
Mm,
fear and anxiety, right? Prepping the soil for change, if you will,
yeah.
creating trust, right? And I'm thinking, okay, counseling 101. Counselor's role is to get someone to get potentially on the other side of what, trauma or something has created in terms of fear, mindset, these deeply embedded behaviors. And there's this dance that happens between the counselor and their client where they're building rapport, they're asking lots of questions, they're drawing out in their person these deeper thought processes. They're making the fear become more conscious based. And so they can address real elements of it, right? As part of this walk or as part of partnering with their client. I don't know. Again, I've never been it, but this is my impression of what's happening in a counseling engagement. And I'm thinking to myself, is there a way for us to mimic some of that with our teams in preparation for inevitable change in the business so that we can do that? We can reduce fear prior to. We can or we can help them kind of think through and label the fear so that we can actually talk at or around that thing. Like, oh, that makes sense. I can understand why you're fearful of that. Okay, well,
Yeah.
let's talk about what's really going to happen, right? So here are a couple things that came to mind. Like one, are we taking enough time to ask questions, right? Like one of the things
Mm,
that we've learned in the consulting role is it's less about what we say and it's a lot more about the questions we're asking, right? To
yeah.
initiate a different way to think about something, to initiate or help someone begin to kind of take this thing apart and think about it differently, put some labels and some definitions on it so that it's more concrete. We can work with it, right? So I was just thinking about like, I think one of the opportunities we have before acting or implementing big change in our organization is just meeting with our people and spending more time asking questions and helping them bring to the surface the things that we've got a track record of experience that tells us these are things that often come up and create this friction point when I'm trying to change a team's behavior or get better alignment behind a new strategy or initiative. I think another thing is spending
Mm,
more time unpacking the reasons or motivation behind the change. right? And I
Yeah.
think this is kind of what you alluded to with your example is, had you sat down with your people and talked through where your head is, the thought that you're processing, the initiative, the why behind the initiative, how you see it being relevant to the organization. And for some reason, I know myself, I've done this, and I know that I've seen a lot of other leaders have they are hesitant to talk with their people about the why behind these changes that are coming. And we're quick to say everybody buys into the whole cultural buzzword of why. Why? It's all about telling the why. And we like the concept, but
Yeah.
most of us have a pretty damn hard time prioritizing talking through the why and or trusting in ourselves enough and trusting our people enough to actually talk about the why, right? So just
Yeah.
spending more time unpacking the reason or the motivation behind plans, right? I got caught flat-footed in our own company recently. I didn't I didn't do that well enough to some of the individuals on our team. And I fueled what was probably unnecessary friction in the business. We were able to get on the other side of it, but I think my lack of taking the time and slowing down and making sure that they understood why and where we're going, it hindered us, right? And then I think this other thing is like in regard to fear or the fear to the upcoming change or the inevitable change in the organization again is I think the better job I've done where I've tried to help identify the elephant in the room. Like I'm helping them apply definitions. Like why just on a surface level, when we present this idea, what would make you fearful of that change? Like
Mm.
from your seat, from your world perspective inside our organization, what are the
Hmm.
things that start coming to mind that would create friction for you, or pause, or a lack of excitement to get behind this movement and actually listening to what they have to say? Because I think what that then empowers us to be able to do as a leader, one is to really understand why there's friction in the change process. But
Mm.
before that, fundamentally, it's like it gives us the ability to coach our employee or our team member through this thinking process of why are they fearful, right? Because often they don't even know, like they can't even fully put into words unless
Yeah.
we take this time to draw it out of them, like give them the platform, give them the time and the space to think through it and do it from the perspective of it. This is for them. It's not just to get the job done. It's not, we don't
Yeah.
just take this time to get them to agree with us, but that we actually do it so that when we engineer the change in the business, we've helped them think through it in a productive way prior to. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think some of the great leaders I've observed and experienced that, like, one of the things I've noticed about how they go about it, and the best are like noticeably more tuned into this, is they really they bring an idea for change with a complete open mind. Now, of course, you can't do this. I'm not talking about you own a small business with five people in it, and well, excuse me. Let me change that. You cannot, in a business with 50 or 100 or 200 people, have a one-on-one meeting with every single person about what they think about this potential change you're going to make.
Yeah.
Right? It's just
Not one
unrealistic,
person. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, in a small team of five, you actually could,
Yeah.
right? But as we get bigger, right, it makes it difficult. And so, what I'm talking about is engaging our key leaders, right? Most often as owners, right? But the ones I've seen do this, both up close and then in podcasts, and heard how people talk about and frame this, is they're really good at, before they commit fully
Mm.
to the change that they think needs to happen,
Mhm.
they engage the people, the peers, and their downline immediate leaders in the question. Before they fully committed to this must happen,
Yeah.
they show up to that initial interaction with a completely open mind that they might have this wrong, this might be the wrong timing, this may be the wrong target.
Yeah,
And there may be things I'm not thinking of yet that are going to play heavily into whether or not this works or creates the intended outcome that I
for sure.
want. And I'm also recognizing in my own personal and professional growth, like that requires a lot of discipline to slow down and remind myself that I almost certainly don't have all the information and perspective on this, and to go in genuinely curious because I do this, and I see our leaders that we're engaged with do this, where they may even go and have a one-on-one with their operations manager, their GM, their department heads, their leadership team
Yeah,
prior to rolling out a thing,
yeah,
but really in their mind they've already made the decision.
yeah, totally
You
fair.
know what I mean?
Yeah,
And just some of the best leaders I've seen and read about and admire, they genuinely come to that first conversation uh not committed either way. They have a vision for what maybe needs to happen, but they have not, they come in completely with an open mind, ready to hear something that might change their decision.
yeah,
Um, And I don't know, that's something I want to grow in because I can really plant my feet quickly sometimes, thinking I know exactly this, and I allow myself to be totally convicted before I've solicited that input and perspective.
mhm.
And I think it sends me off in the wrong direction sometimes, or it creates more drama,
More drama.
right? When I do roll out that thing, even if I was right.
Yeah, I almost feel like to a certain extent you're pointing towards the kind of the whole premise behind the buy-in equation.
Yeah.
Um, and for those of you listening that maybe haven't been exposed to that concept before, certainly not ours. But it's this idea, right, that the equation, okay, it's quality of idea times buy-in equals execution, right? Kind of it's your whole, A times B equals C kind of scenario, right? And I think what basically my understanding, our understanding of the buy-in equation is that we often as leaders get really connected to the quality of the idea, the value of the idea. And so we make that idea ours. And we lose sight of that second part of the equation, which is buy in. And that these two things multiplied together actually creates for us what level of execution our team is going to provide and engage in. And the way that I've been exposed to this buy-in equation concept is that if we can hold on to the how with looser hands,
Mm,
and allow our downline personnel, whether that be downline leaders, whether that be downline influencers in the organization, to help contribute to the how, the in quotes, the idea, then their
mm,
buy-in is exponentially higher, which in turn creates a way higher percent of execution or value on execution. So, example, my idea 10, buy-in is low because it was my idea. It's a 3, right? My ultimate execution is 30, right? But what if my idea is not the idea? I let the team have the idea, and it's, from my perspective, it's a 7, but their buy-in's a freaking 10 because it was their idea. Well, then our execution's a 70. It's 2x what we thought we would get or hoped for because we generated the idea. And I think that's kind of part of what you're alluding to is that if we come in open-minded enough, we may get feedback or input from our leaders, from our downline team members that actually shapes the concept more better. And obviously, the buy-in is so much higher that the engagement, the commitment, and the execution, then, which is the real fruit we're aiming for, is substantially higher. And I think that's ultimately what happens a lot of times when we're creating change in our organization is that smart people have done their due diligence and come up with some really good ideas. And the idea is a 10, but the way that we deliver and the lack of way that we engage our people to help create that idea the buy-in is so low that it cannonballs the entire adoption and execution, right? And I think that's ultimately what we see.
Yeah, dude, this is classic Patrick Lencioni, the table group. Like
Yep.
this is I think one of my favorite books of his. I think it was called The Advantage. And but it's all about this. And you and I, we've learned to do this. In fact, this goes all the way back to our early days of working together of um I think I sort of call it's not very sexy. Somebody else says it better, I'm sure, but I thought of it as preceding meetings
Yep.
by ahead of time meeting with the individual stakeholders. And it's almost like you you're getting agreement before you ever open the conversation that yeah, this is important and yeah, this should change. And then when you get together, then it is mostly about how do we do this? and
Yep.
and then as a leader, once everybody's convicted that this thing needs to happen
Yep.
or this outcome needs to be produced, then you can just kind of like hand it all off. Like Jeff Bezos is famous for this. Like he's talked about this a lot, where he tries to be the absolute last person to talk in the room. And normally he's just closing the meeting because the decision's already been made by the group, which means they own it.
Mhm.
Like they're convicted about it because they came up with the how. And I don't know. I just find for me it's such a discipline thing for owners. It's just like I don't know. It's an ego. For me, it's an ego thing. I get fascinated by my own ideas. I naturally think they're the best and most interesting in the world. Um, right? I mean, it's just, isn't this kind of something that's inside all of us? Those of us that are inclined to have our own companies, I think it's part of what drives us to get to where we are. And then you realize it's like that yin and yang thing. It's like, yeah, okay, it was really good. Like my instinct to come up with a great idea and act on it and go for it. It's the thing that gets you to a point where you have a team, you
Yeah.
know? And then it's the very thing that keeps you from building an empire
Yeah.
because all the good ideas have to come from you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And no
No.
surprise, it pisses people off. It makes them anxious and fearful, and it makes them feel insecure because you're always the smartest person in the room, and they never know what's going to happen. You know?
It's one of those things to where maybe just kind of start moving this towards kind of towards a close. I, I think where my head goes, just kind of based on our conversation and obviously what's led up to even talking about this in the first place, is we really have a stewarding responsibility. And
Mm,
I think that at times we get so swept up in owner leader titles that
mm,
we forget kind of the spirit of, right? So working example here a little bit. I think we've all seen scenarios where we've had a team member that checks the box. Like if you say, "Hey, here's the 5 things you do when we receive a first call and onboard a client." And you could see two people. One person understands the boxes that have to be checked,
hmm.
and one person understands the boxes, but understands the spirit behind why we're checking those boxes. And if you were
Yeah,
to look at their performance, you would see two very different things. You'd have a team member that makes you frustrated because even though they've checked the boxes, you know they're not giving the level of commitment that you want and they're not producing the fruit you want or need because they don't understand or buy into the spirit of the boxes that they're checking. And then
right.
when you have that person that gets it, like when they check those boxes, clients feel welcomed, heard, proactively engaged, well managed, right? Like two
Mm,
very different outcomes. And I think as leaders, we can slip into this space where we've bought into some basic leadership requirements or leadership boxes that we're checking, but we're
mm,
but we are maybe off track and or have gotten too disconnected from the spirit behind it. And I think that when I think about leading our organizations through change, whether you're the owner, entrepreneur, whether you're a key leader or influencer in the org chart, we understand box wise what we're trying to do. This is good
Mm,
for the business. We need to get alignment. We need to move our team into alignment with this because it's good for the business. That's the box being checked. But I think we can lose sight of the spirit behind it. And the spirit behind it is you're the leaders, you're the one with access to the most information. You are the one that already by title, a lot of trust and fear equally is placed in your hands. And we have the opportunity to remember the spirit behind leadership is stewardship. And what are we doing to affect stewardship when we're changing the organization versus just merely checking the leadership boxes that we've all bought in need to get checked as part of that?
mm,
And I think that in that gap somewhere, and it's going to look slightly different for each leader, each person based on their natural wiring and kind of experience. And I think it's going to look slightly different based on the genetics of the organization, the type of personnel, the type of business, the type of businesses you serve, clients you serve. But I think the reminder for all of us guys is that look, change is scary. And when people have unspoken fear, it creates actions and behaviors that often can become unreasonable and disconnected from fact and truth. But it doesn't make it any less scary for them. It doesn't make it any less a real friction point or thing that we need to overcome as leaders. But if
mm.
we can dig into that fear a little bit, if we can steward our people through that process and engage them in such a way that they're heard, that we can help them unpack and think maybe more literally and maybe more concretely through what's driving some of that fear, i.e., get them engaged in the how,
Yeah.
we can see just a fundamentally different experience on the other side once we move that company through that change. And this is a reminder to me, like just for the sake of clarity, anybody that listens to our show, I know at times I can talk but please don't get it twisted. When I get real preachy, there's about a 99.8% chance that the majority of those thoughts are directed back at something that I either have recently failed to do or I've disappointed myself in because I catch myself failing to be the best version, right, of what I could be. And so this is not an example to point fingers at anybody or say left or right. It's just a matter of, man, we have a big responsibility when we shift our organizations, and change is scary as shit for our people, and we could do it differently. And I think at times we could create an outcome that even surprises us in its level of adoption and execution.
Well, and the only thing that I would, I guess, add to or counterpoint to what you just summarized is that I think as owners, sometimes we we get caught up in the idea that we have more information than anybody else just because of our role. I mean, like financially and otherwise, and I think too, part of the wisdom is in us recognizing that while we have a lot of fundamental information about the business and what the business needs and all this stuff, is that there are elements of the business that we probably don't have as much information on as our downline people do with the interactions they're having with customers, what they're seeing in the field, the observations they're making of other employees and behaviors and process, what works, what doesn't work actually in the field. You know, you and I we've ran into this multiple times, but I still remember as we were coming up in the industry and building teams, and we started surveying our employees.
Yeah,
That was one of the things that came out was there was a sense by the people down on the front lines
yeah,
that the leadership didn't really know what was going on. And I think we in the end we determined that there was truth to it. You know, there was elements where we'd grown to such an
yeah,
extent to where
yeah,
we weren't on the jobs, we weren't on every job site anymore.
yeah,
We weren't actually seeing how some of these processes played out in real time
yeah,
and so forth. And
yeah,
so I just think it's like that both and, right? It's like bringing people in on what we see and what we know,
yeah,
and then also soliciting back from them, what else?
yeah,
Like, what are we not thinking about? And what are we not seeing So anyway, dude, well, this is good, man. So we started at Trump and Doge and Hitler and USAID and social media, and I think we actually landed the plane, bro.
I think we actually landed on something of, I think, mutually high value. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, and
Okay, well,
if this, guys, hang in the pocket on this stuff a bit. Like, because I know that most of the people that listen to our show, if they're not changing the organization, they're in the midst of changing themselves in some
mm,
material way professionally, maybe even personally. And I think that to some extent, this applies to all of us, whether it be on an individual basis or in our organizations or in our teams, depending on where you are, in the food chain. I think these are universal spaces for us to consider and take inventory of and just see if there's a way to do it better next time. And that's probably what it boils down to. So,
yeah,
again,
it's good.
yeah,
Okay,
thanks for hanging out, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.
till next time.